Good morning, everybody. I am going to read something to you from my writing on my blog, and I will post underneath this video also how you can have access to this blog. It is called, my blog is called Sound Verbal Behavior at blogspot.com. But in any case, this particular writing today is about creation. And I would like to say something very specific about the importance of creating your own reality with your language. Yeah. As long as you do have disembodied language, which is the language which we are used to, you are not creating your own reality. And no matter how much you are involved in all sorts of arguments and in all sorts of claims, and you are having your beliefs, you're having your values, you have your own opinion, it is still all disembodied language. And disembodied language is the language of your conditioning history. We have all been conditioned to have disembodied language. We have not been taught, nobody has been taught to have what I call embodied language. And so it is a fact of life that we have all been conditioned to speak in a way in which we do not hear ourselves while we talk. If we would have learned from early on to speak and to listen to ourselves while we speak, we would speak like I do right now. And I do this a little bit exaggerated, maybe just to illustrate to you what it is, because it is slower, of course. It is calmer. It is still. It is peaceful. It is embodied. It is your embodied language. Nobody has learned anywhere, not from their parents, not from school, not from a therapist. Nobody has ever learned from the psychologist, from the psychiatrist, from the philosopher, from the scientist. We have not learned, not from our leaders, not from our spiritual leaders, not from our religion. We have not learned to have embodied language. And there's a real reason why we have not tapped into our own sound, the sound of our well-being, which is needed to express our embodied language. Without that sound, without our authentic sound, which is not a sound which we're trying to create, yeah? So when I read something about creating, I'm not creating my sound. I'm not trying to sound good or trying to sound pleasant or trying to sound calm. No, I am sounding the way I'm sounding, and I am embodying my language because I listen to myself. And by listening to myself, I create the situation in which I can have embodied language. And without me listening to myself, without someone listening to him or herself, the situation doesn't allow us to produce embodied language. And yes, um, there have, of course, been situations in which we are having a good time together, in which we feel safe, in which we are among people we like and people who are similar to us and who have the same habits and so forth and so forth. And that's all wonderful. And yes, we produce aspects of our embodied language because we feel happy, we feel relaxed, we can be ourselves. However, such circumstances, which do of course occur, although of course in today's world they occur less and less because our disembodied language has sort of accumulatively made it less and less likely that we are creating those circumstances. Yeah, we are all very divided. We are all very much on our own. Our technology has sort of just chipped away at our ability to communicate. We find texting more important than actually talking and looking each other in the eyes. And so there is a general decline of communication skills, and that is only further enhanced by all our technology and our already existing emphasis on what I call disembodied language. So it is only when a person is going to take time to listen to him or herself that he or she is going to be able to recognize, acknowledge, accept, explore that a person's embodied language is entirely different from the language that we are used to, which is disembodied language. And it is still the most important issue of our time because the accumulative effects of our disembodied language have created so much havoc, have created so many problems, and these problems are just piling up on us. And we cannot do anything to decrease these problems, to solve these problems, to properly address these problems with our disembodied language. We need to have embodied language to actually deal with and overcome the problems that were created with our disembodied language. So, now, you hear that I am having embodied language. You can have embodied language too. Come and talk with me, look me up, send me an email message. We will Skype together. I will reinforce your embodied language. And you, while you are on your own, you need to begin to talk out loud with yourself. You need to begin to acknowledge for yourself this difference that I'm talking about is really there. And it is possible for you to discover that and to continue with your embodied language. I reinforce that. I am happy to talk with you about that. If you are open to exploring this, you will find that it has major implications for everything you do. Okay, today I feel very, very happy. Uh, I wrote this text this morning, but I already feel happy from yesterday because I created a new song, and I'm always so excited when I create a new song because I can't wait to play it and to record it. But I first must learn it well enough so that I can record it properly. It's a beautiful song, and I wrote my own text to it. So I feel so happy because I've created another text to an already existing song. So this is what I do. I hear certain songs, or I know certain songs. I remember certain songs, also a whole bunch of songs that I remember from my past. And I hear these songs. There are certain songs which I really liked. I like the vibe, I like the sound, I like the music. And then if I can find the chords, I look it up on the internet. And I can play these chords on my ukulele. Then then I bring my own words to this song. I create my own text to this already existing song. So I'm going to sing it soon and I'm going to record it soon. And if you check out my YouTube channel, if you type my name, Maximus Pepperkamp with 1P, then you can hear this song. Each melody, which I like and which I can find and play the chords of on my ukulele, each melody then becomes a part of my repertoire, which just keeps on increasing, which keeps on growing. I have many songbooks, many different songs. And this song, it is a beautiful song already in and of itself. And I created a wonderful text that goes with it. So I love to play these simple melodies. And then I effortlessly, almost effortlessly, these texts, they just effortlessly fit with these songs. It is just amazing how wonderful that works. And this creative process, of course, yeah, it is an aspect of my embodied language. It reflects my embodied language. My embodied language in which the words emerge as they come. So this is a very important part of embodied language. When you sit by yourself and you begin to hear your own sound and you begin to experience that you can continue to speak with the sound of your own well-being, then you realize that the words, they just come by themselves. And sometimes you just wait, and also the silences come by themselves. And it's a wonderful process of creativity. It's a wonderful process of renewing yourself, nourishing yourself, knowing yourself, because you will be able to say all kinds of things which you cannot say if you do not listen to yourself, if you do not tune in to your sound, which makes you feel good, if you do not have embodied language. Yeah. So this songwriting business to songs that already exist, it reflects something about my embodied language, in which the words emerge by themselves. Of course, with each of my songs, I feel very strongly that the words which I bring to the melody, they are actually caused by that melody. Do you get that? I like that melody so much and I put my words to it. In embodied language, I like my sound so much, and these words, they just naturally come with this wonderful sound, the sound of my relaxation, the sound of my happiness, the sound of my sense of comfort, the sound of my, of who I really am. Yeah. Okay. In embodied language, I say and create what I want to say based on the sound of my own well-being. Yeah. So it is something very individual, and each of us can only do this by paying attention to our own sound. And I always say something new, even though the words have already been used so many times. So that's another marvelous thing. The language in and of itself doesn't change, and yet you use these words very differently because you produce this sound, which allows you to, to basically renew yourself as you speak. And similarly, the melodies that I choose to sing, they have already been sung many times by other people, but I update them with my own text, with my interpretation, with my words, and of course also as I sing them with my sound, the sound of my voice as well as the sound of my ukulele. Another aspect of embodied language is that it is, of course, a reinterpretation of our disembodied language, which everyone is unconsciously involved in. So once you begin to have your embodied language, you can actually begin to reflect on what was going on while while you were involved in this disembodied language. And you're finally able to understand what you were not able to understand. You're finally able to articulate, to yeah to recognize what really went on, because in disembodied language, where we do not listen to ourselves, we are struggling with each other to get each other's attention. We're struggling with ourselves because, on the one hand, we want other people to perceive us a certain way, but on the other hand, we perceive ourselves a certain way. And we are worried that people notice that we are nervous or something like that, or that we are not as strong as we claim to be, or not as certain, or not as, I don't know, knowledgeable as we pretend to be. Anyway, there's all sorts of struggles that go on. Yeah, the way that we perceive ourselves and the way we want to be perceived. And there's all these things. Anyways, in disembodied language, in which we are unconsciously involved, we do not even realize that we are on automatic pilot. We get carried away by what we say, so we don't pay attention anymore to how we sound, and we are struggling with each other. We are fighting. We try to get the attention, and also, of course, um, there is this um, yeah, what I call the fixation on words, where we get carried away by what we say, and then there is this, yeah, also this constant feeling of like, are they accepting me, are they understanding me, or are they trying to, I don't know, shut me up? Are they trying to kill me, or are they trying to threaten me? So there's this constant being on guard, and you're constantly busy with others, but you're not really listening to yourself. So there's this outward orientation, you're kind of on guard. Yeah. And so that all changes the sound of our voice. That all prevents us from listening to ourselves. Yeah. When you listen to yourself, you're not struggling. You're not yeah, being too verbally, what is it, entrenched in your what you're going to say, kind of like also predetermined speech. You're not, you're spontaneous. You can actually be alive in your conversation. Yeah. And so, and that's when you hear yourself. Yeah. And you are not busy with the other person. No, you hear yourself. You tune into yourself. You stay attuned to yourself. So that is, yeah, that's a whole different way of talking. And yes, in your disembodied language, yeah, all kinds of troubles emerge, all kind of anxieties, all kind of stressors, and all kind of frustrations. And you will finally be able to reinterpret this with your embodied language. So embodied language is a reinterpretation of disembodied language. And I'm capable of doing this because I listen to the sound of my own voice while I speak. And you can hear and feel that already. And anyone who would do what I do, they also would want to do the same. As our individual experience of our own language, that is where our language becomes really meaningful. So, this is an aspect of language which we have yet to address. In disembodied language, we don't listen to ourselves while we speak, and consequently, our language is meaningless to who we are as individuals. Although we may pretend and defend and make all sorts of forceful claims in our disembodied language, our mechanical language isn't working for us, it is working against us. And it isn't until we begin to listen to ourselves that we kind of come to our senses, and that this self-defeating process of disembodied language, that it stops, and that instead we now use our embodied language to create. Yes, in embodied language, we create. Surely, during this embodied language, we let others with their use of language determine our reality. But during embodied language, we determine our reality with our own language. We create our own reality with our embodied language. And it is often said people are entitled to their own opinion, but not to their own facts. But with our embodied language, we find that this so called confusion between the difference between opinion and facts is due to our disembodied language. Because once we have embodied language, we state the facts of our own experience to which only we as individuals have access. So there is an access to facts which pertains to who we are as individuals, and only we have that access, and only we can verbalize these facts when we have embodied language. Yeah. Although we may believe in disembodied language to be using our own language, when we take time to speak with ourselves and listen to ourselves, we find out, to our big surprise, that we speak with a sound which sounds alien to us. We don't even want to hear that sound because it clearly illustrates that we are disconnected from ourselves with that sound. And this negative sound of our disembodied language, it stops as we can recognize that we were speaking with this sound because it was imposed on us. We were supposed to talk a certain way. We were supposed to sound a certain way. We were supposed to sound obedient. We were supposed to sound, yeah, subservient, like, we have to sound inferior to those people who are supposedly superior to us. Yeah, you cannot just speak to your boss in the same way as you speak to your friend. Yeah, your boss is superior to you and you are inferior, and you're supposed to sound inferior. Don't you get any ideas? You gotta know your place. This is how we sound not like ourselves in this embodied language. However, when you begin to speak with yourself and listen to yourself, you will hear that this is not the sound of who you are. You don't want to sound like that. You sound phony. You sound stressed. You sound anxious. You sound frustrated. You sound confused. And when you continue to speak with that sound, with that alien sound, that sound which is not like you, of course, you are also imposing on yourself the disembodied language which was imposed on you by others. Yeah? Others have threatened you, others have punished you, that if you do not talk the way you're supposed to talk, you are socially rejected. Yeah? And social disqualification is, of course, the reason why we continue with our disembodied language. Yeah, the disembodied language which maintains the hierarchy of everybody who is supposedly superior and therefore who may do all the talking. Yeah, the authorities. Yeah, and you are inferior. Yeah, and you may only listen, you may only learn. Yeah, you may only be polite, or you may only do as you're told. Yeah, be a slave. And so there's an enslavement that goes on due to disembodied language, which we haven't yet begun to talk about. We talk about a lot of other enslavement, but never the enslavement which is very common to our usual way of talking. Okay, so we stop imposing anything on ourselves and on each other once we accept, understand, recognize, and therefore stop our disembodied language and discover ways to continue with our embodied language. In other words, we begin to create our own lives once we know that we can have embodied language. Once we know that it is possible, we find ways to have it. And this finding ways to have it means that we create circumstances in which it is going to be possible. This experience of creation is so powerful and so enchanting. Yeah, I discovered this when I was about 20 years old, and it has been such a wonderful journey ever since I discovered this. It wasn't, of course, immediately clear everything. I learned everything along the way. I'm now 65 years old, but I am so fortunate that I have discovered this because my embodied language, it protects me, it encourages me, it enriches me, and it energizes me. And it will do the same to you if you find your embodied language. Once we have identified the enormous difference between our disembodied language and our embodied language, we want to go on with our embodied language. It is very clear. Because we want to do what we are naturally inclined to do. And this is what we are naturally inclined to do. And this is therefore not something idealistic. No, this is something very realistic. And this is something very effective, something very pragmatic. Moreover, we experience with our embodied language immediately the positive consequence of this activity. We experience immediately how this benefits us. And these direct effects of our embodied language, they are so tangible, they're so noticeable, that we have faith in the positive long-term effects of our embodied language, which will eventually begin to occur, in spite of the fact that we notice that nobody is having embodied language. Everybody seems to be continuously entrenched in, conditioned by, hypnotized by disembodied language. So in spite of that being the reality that we're all conditioned to have disembodied language, we begin to have faith in the long-term effects of what we experience in the moment, that the immediate positive effects of our embodied language, they will pave the way for our future. I speak from experience. With our embodied language, we create order, which replaces the disorder and the chaos of our own previous disembodied language. Initially, our embodied language is of course not continuous. Yeah, we only will have some moments of it and then we kind of go back into our conditioning again. And yeah, it takes experimentation for us to figure out that we want to continue with our embodied language. So initially, yeah, we will start out by just having some moments of embodied language, and then we realize like, oh my goodness, our conditioning history kind of takes over again. But as we keep catching ourselves with our old habit of having disembodied language, we begin to witness the gradual decline of our disembodied language, and as our disembodied language declines, our embodied language begins to increase. This verbal change from disorder to order has a major impact on all our other behaviors, as all the behavior that was controlled by our disembodied language, it will also be stopped. Once our disembodied language is stopped, all the behavior that was associated will also begin to decline. It happens by itself. Only the behavior which is controlled by our embodied language is going to increase, is going to become more prominent, is going to become more visible, more audible, more noticeable, more self-evident. There's going to be a complete overhaul of our behavioral repertoire. And quite literally, we create these new opportunities as we can now act consistently, or increasingly more consistently, on our own instructions about what we should do and what we shouldn't do in order to be happy, successful, and satisfied. Yes, we instruct ourselves very differently with our embodied language. Once we joyfully create our own reality with our embodied language, we are no longer as vulnerable to how others view us, as they don't affect us anymore with their disembodied language, because we create our own reality with our embodied language. Since we are in charge, you are now your own authority. As your embodied language, it stimulates you to be a light unto yourself, to be your own authority. With each increase of our embodied language, we experience more and more of our freedom. It is important to take note of the audible, noticeable, and observable fact that we do not create anything inside of our so-called mind with our embodied language. This whole issue of our mind, of our thoughts, of what supposedly goes on inside our heads is a moot point in embodied language. We are not busy with what we are thinking or with our mind. All of that is just imaginary stuff which has occurred due to our disembodied language, in which we believe that language exists inside of us. With our embodied language, we express overtly, while we speak, while we write, our new, delightful way of dealing with our language. And we can hear it. We can read it. Other people can hear it. Other people can read it. And this embodied language that I'm talking about, it can of course also be reinforced by me, by anyone who, like me, is able to have it. I have a wonderful friend in Holland, Annemiek, who can also reinforce your embodied language. So, embodied language changes our knowledge about language because it teaches us that language is an overt phenomenon, which means it is spoken, it is heard, it is written, and it is read. There's no language inside of us, period. And it has nothing to do with changing our mind. We're not busy with our mind. The mind is just an illusion which is created and maintained by the disembodied language in which we unconsciously engage because we are not listening to ourselves. Our lives keep on improving without having any sense that we are working on it, because we create new circumstances with our language in which we can and will be new due to the way in which we sound. Whew. Our natural, relaxed, embodied energy, our resonant voice, leads the way and assures us that we create our own wholeness. Oh, we heal from all our troubles, we heal from all our trauma, we leave all the disembodied language in the past. As our embodied language gains momentum, we can't avoid noticing the accumulative effects of the many, many, many positive, self-evident changes which go along with this transformational process, and we perceive our own ongoing embodied language as our language enlightenment. Each time, this is of course, kind of like where it's going, okay? I have achieved this language enlightenment. Initially, you got to start where you are, there's no way around that. But you will get there. You will notice that as your embodied language increases, as your disembodied language decreases, you will notice that your ongoing embodied language, it makes you feel enlightened. And that's why I call it language enlightenment. It makes you still also. You are so at peace with yourself. You understand yourself. You are yourself. You have fully expressed yourself as language enlightenment. So each time we stop our disembodied language, and in the beginning, you got to stop your disembodied language first before the embodied language can begin. Each time we stop our disembodied language and continue with our embodied language, we fully acknowledge, it's a very important point, we fully acknowledge that disembodied language and embodied language, they are mutually exclusive, which means when our disembodied language stops, only then can our embodied language begin. And of course, once our embodied language stops again, once our conditioning history takes over, that's old habit. It happens. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. That's how we were conditioned. When our embodied language stops, then our disembodied language takes over. And it's very strange how that is, because it always happens unconsciously. We kind of only retrospectively realize like, oh my gosh, I was busy with disembodied language all the time. And then you are already again involved in embodied language. It's so beautiful how that works. So each time we succeed in having embodied language, even if it's only for just a few moments, we already experience aspects of this language enlightenment, which I was just mentioning. Because it is just feeling so good. It makes things so clear. Your embodied language, even if it just goes on for a little bit, ongoing embodied language, no matter how, it's not about quantity, it's about quality. If you just have some embodied language, you already begin to notice your natural state, which is your language enlightenment, which is another way of saying that your language actually fits with your own experience of well-being. And we realize, as we recognize in our ongoing embodied language, our language enlightenment, we realize that we have always had these beautiful experiences, which we now call language enlightenment. We always had these experiences, even while we were not having the language to express them. In effect, we now create with our embodied language how we have always been. how we have always been. It's like magic. And yet it is totally normal. It is the effect of our embodied language.